Hello 5SDM and welcome back to Kenzuki's Kingdom. We're just going to finish the very last page of the last chapter as a reminder of what had happened. So here's a picture at the top of a supertanker. It is what Michael has just spotted from the top of his hill, glancing up from repairing his hat. He spotted on the horizon an enormous ship. So let's carry on now with chapter 6. Abunai. In an instant I was on my feet, shouting at the top of my voice and waving frantically. I leapt up and down, screaming for them to stop, to hear me, to see me. "I'm here! Here! I'm here!" Only when my throat was raw and I could shout no longer did I stop. The tanker crept tantalizingly slowly along the horizon. It did not turn. And by then I knew it would not turn. I knew too that no one would be looking, and that even if they were, this entire island would be little more than a distant hazy hump on the horizon. How then could they possibly see me? I could only look on, helpless and distraught, as the tanker moved inexorably further and further away from me until it began to disappear over the horizon. This took all morning. This took all morning long. A morning of dreadful anguish. As I stood watching on the summit of Watch Hill, my despair was replaced by a burning anger. If I had been allowed to have my fire, there would at least have been a chance that they could have spotted the smoke. True, the old man had brought me a sleeping mat and a sheet. He was looking after me, he was keeping me alive, but he was also keeping me prisoner. As the last vestige of the tanker sank from my view, I promised myself that I would never again let such a chance go by. I felt in my pocket. I still had my precious fire-glass. I determined I would do it. I would build another fire, not down on the beach where he could find it, but up here on Watch Hill, behind the rocks and well out of his sight, even if he did have binoculars, and I now had to presume that he did. I would gather a great beacon of wood, but I would not light it. I would set it all up and wait until the moment I saw a ship. If this one had come, I reasoned, then another one would come, had to come, and when it did, I would have my fire-glass ready and a cachet of paper-thin, tinder-dry leaves. I would make such a blazing inferno of a fire that would send up such a towering smoke signal that the next ship that happened along would have to see it. So now I no longer spent my days just sitting on Watch Hill and waiting. Every hour I was up there, I spent building my beacon. I would drag great branches up over the rocky scree from the forest below and pile them high, but on the seaward side of the hilltop, the perfect place for it to be seen by ships when it was lit, but in the meantime, not by the prying eyes of the old man, who I thought of now as my captor. And he would be watching me, I was quite sure of that now. Through all the fetching and carrying, I kept well out of his sight. Only eyes from the sea could possibly have known what I was doing, and there were no eyes out there to see me. It took several days of hard labour to build my secret beacon. I had almost finished when someone did indeed discover what I was up to, but it wasn't the old man. I was heaving a massive branch onto the pile when I felt a sudden shadow come over me. An orangutan was looking down at me from the rock above. I could not be sure it was the same one as before. It was on all fours, his great shoulders hunched, his head lowered, eyeing me slightly sideways. I dared not move. It was a standoff, just as it had been before down on the beach. He sat back and looked at me with mild interest for a while. Then he looked away, scratched his face nonchalantly and sloped off, stopping once to glance back over at me over his shoulder, before moving on into the shadow of the trees and away. It occurred to me as I watched him go that maybe he'd been sent to spy on me, that he might go back and tell the old man what he'd seen me doing. It was a ridiculous thought, I know, but I do remember thinking it. A storm broke over the island that night. Such a fearsome storm, such a thunderous crashing of lightning overhead, such a din of rain and wind that sleep was quite impossible. Great waves roared in from the ocean, pounding the beach and shaking the ground beneath me. I spread out my sleeping mat at the very back of my cave. Stella lay down beside me and huddled close. How I welcomed that. It was fully 4 days before the storm blew itself out, but even during the worst of it, I would find my fish and fruit breakfast waiting for me every morning under my tin, which he'd now wedged tight in under the same shelf of rock. Stella and I kept to the shelter of our cave. All we could do was watch as the rain came lashing down outside. I looked on awestruck at the power of the vast waves rolling in from the sea, curling, tumbling and exploding as they broke on the beach, as if they were trying to batter the island into pieces and then suck us all out to sea. I thought often of my mother and father and the Peggy Sue and wondered where they were. I just hoped the typhoon, for that was what I was witnessing, had passed them by. Then one morning, as suddenly as the storm had begun, it stopped. The sun blazed down from a clear blue sky, and the forest symphony started up where it had left off. I ventured out. The whole island steamed and dripped. I went at once to Watch Hill to see if I could see a ship, perhaps blown off course, or maybe sheltering in the lee of the island. There was nothing there. That was a disappointment, but at least I found my beacon had not collapsed. It was sodden, of course, but still intact. Everything was sodden. There could be no fire now until it had dried out. And that's where we're going to stop for now.